She's back. Welcome back to another episode of Digging Deep. It is so lovely to have you. Happy 2026. Happy New Year. If you've been following this channel for a little bit, you know that the past few years I've done a word of the year, and this will be the third year that I've done that. 2025 was collectively a year for shedding skin, for reevaluating our values, our belief systems, and truly for me, it was such a hard year. Just so much unlearning of these systems that have ruled my life for so long that no longer serve me, while also still trying to cultivate what does serve me and figure out what I want, which leads me to this year. This year's word of the year is unlimited, and for me that means completely centering and honoring myself and my desires, going after what I want, even if that means going after it alone, and finding ways to give what I want to myself. As women, we are naturally life givers, taking something that doesn't exist and giving it form. However, what we bring to life is entirely of our own choosing. Oftentimes, we are encouraged to put that energy towards making a romantic connection work and putting our energy into a person that may not always reciprocate that energy back to us. But I think it's incredibly empowering and important to pour that energy back into yourself. Ask yourself what you desire. How can you use that creative, life-giving energy to bring something to life? I want this episode to serve as your invitation to ask yourself what you really want and to reevaluate how you've been going after your desires. I want us to get clear on what we want, why we want it, and how we can give that to ourselves. Without further ado, it's time to dig deep. When I was first drafting this episode, mind you, this has been in the works for months on months, but the original concept was going to be how to decenter men. I've done plenty of episodes about love, relationships, dating, romance, and the nuance behind it, but I didn't want this episode to be just another one about men, because even the conversation of decentering men is still giving them too much credit.
Okay, that's it. I'm out of here. All we talk about anymore is big or balls or small dicks. How does it happen that four such smart women have nothing to talk about but boyfriends? So what about us? What we think, we feel, we know, Christ. Does it always have to be about them?
I want this episode to be by and for women and allowing us to completely center ourselves, putting ourselves in this sacred circle that we'll touch on a little bit later, but making sure that we are following what we want. If you're like me and grew up watching Grey's Anatomy, I hope you would remember the iconic scene from Christina Yang to Meredith, and I just found out that this was her final scene in the show. Like, this was her goodbye to Meredith, and she said this: "You are a gifted surgeon with an extraordinary mind. Don't let what he wants eclipse what you need. He is very dreamy, but he is not the sun. You are." Whoever the he of your situation is, whether it is an actual man or parents or societal pressures, they are not the sun. You are. This is your life. This is your experience on earth, and you would be doing yourself and the world a disservice if you're centering everybody else's desires in your decision-making process. I'm very interested in unpacking female desire, why we want what we want, how we go about getting that, and how society gets in the way of that process. I came across the brilliant essay by Audre Lorde called The Uses of the Erotic. And before we get into that, when I was originally researching just female desire in general, it is automatically assumed with every search engine that I go into that I am talking about sexual desire, which really frustrated me because it is just reducing desire, this grand concept, especially as it pertains to women, to being something that is only physical, something that is only marketable in that way. Sure, desire can include sex and love and intimacy in that way, but it can also be so much more than that. Lorde writes that the erotic offers a well of replenishing and provocative force to the woman who does not fear its revelation, nor succumb to the belief that sensation is enough. The erotic is a measure between the beginnings of our own sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings. It is an internal sense of satisfaction to which, once we have experienced it, we know we can aspire. For having experienced the fullness of this depth of feeling and recognizing its power in honor and self-respect, we can require no less of ourselves. I am currently on my own path, and this past year has been me going down that path of giving myself permission to want what I want. I am someone that has always wanted a big life for myself. I feel like I've talked about this in a few different episodes. Not so much in a materialistic type of wanting a big life way, but in a I have these huge dreams, no matter how much I run from them, no matter how much I try to deny myself of them or make myself satisfied with a smaller, more logical life, I keep coming back to this desire for more, more, more. And I know that there are a lot of women like that just have this deep pull for more or a deep pull away from their current situation. And that is the erotic. That is the life force energy that you can use to fuel you towards your dreams. Whatever energy you're using towards that man, flip it around, double it, and give it to yourself. For the erotic is not a question only of what we do, it is a question of how acutely and fully we can feel in the doing. Once we know the extent to which we are capable of feeling that sense of satisfaction and completion, we can then observe which of our various life endeavors brings us closest to that fullness. I highlighted a couple of words in that quote because they just really stuck out to me. Satisfaction, various life endeavors, and fullness. Oftentimes when we think of our desires and what we want, we think that there is a one-way path to getting those things and that there's only one way for us to be happy. There are so many different things that you could be successful in that will bring you joy, and joy is often hidden in unexpected places. For example, I've told the story like 8 billion times. I'm so sorry to tell it the 8 billionth in one time, but my whole life I wanted to be a nurse. I thought that would make me happy. And then I got a position working at a hospital and I was miserable. I was like, how am I going to do this my whole life? How am I going to do this my whole life? And I thought that would make me happy. But having that experience showed me that maybe there's something else out there for me. And now I'm in a career that I can see myself doing for a long time, but I also am open to the idea of other things coming in and surprising me with joy and satisfaction. And with asking yourself what you want, why you want it, and how to get it for yourself, the goal should not be instant gratification or what is the quickest possible way to get this, but instead, how can I fully embody my desires without shame, without outside people dictating what your desires actually are. In a video by the Big Think channel, they talk about a concept that I've never heard of before, but it perfectly aligns with what I'm talking about today, which is mimetic desires. Mimetic desire says that I am the product of the desires of others. So many of us have built our lives around mimetic desires without ever pausing and asking ourselves what we really want and desire for ourselves. Especially as a woman, it is so easy to fall into that trap of going along with the life path that has been presented by the women before you. The blueprint is often as follows: get married young, find a career that's maybe not the most fulfilling but makes you enough money, have children, become a stay-at-home mom, and build your life around serving others. And none of that ever gives you time to slow down and ask yourself what you really want. There's this trend on TikTok going around right now. I believe it is from a movie, but it's basically this monologue of this woman reflecting, I think it's on her birthday, later on in life, about how she never got to travel the world. She never got to do X, Y, and Z, do these grand things that people would put on their life lists that are personal desires and things that you should follow. But because she was so focused on pleasing other people and putting others at the center of her life, she forgot to ask herself what she really wants. One of my biggest fears in life in general is not living up to my potential, and this past year has just reminded me of that, and also doing research for this episode has just made me realize how easy it is for women to self-sacrifice, self-abandon, and forget to make ourselves a priority in this process of designing your life. Going back to the Big Think video, they also mentioned a distinction between thin and thick desires. Thin desires are more surface level things. They don't really carry any weight. Things like trend cycles, desiring something because you see that it's popular and others have it, so therefore you're like, okay, that's a value, I want it for myself. But our thick desires, things that we should interrogate and really take the time and the precious attention to craft for ourselves, are things like belief systems, our values, the structure of our lives, and not a lot of us are taking the time to do so. Something that is coupled up with desires is this idea of remaining agentic and autonomous. I have had the privilege of being single my whole life, so thankfully the decisions that I make are by and for me. But even when I think about getting into a relationship one day, I would love to have someone that gives me the space to still remain agentic and remain in control of my own personhood. Henrik Carlson mentions in his Substack that agency is an amalgamation of two skills or mental dispositions, autonomy and efficacy. He says that autonomy is the capacity to dig inside and figure out what wants to happen through you, no matter how strange or wrong it may seem to others. And efficacy, the will to know, the drive to see reality as it is, so you can manipulate it deftly and solve the problems that you want to solve, instead of fooling yourself that certain problems are unsolvable. I love how he mentioned in describing efficacy that it's important to not fool yourself into thinking that certain problems are unsolvable, or even denying yourself the ability to go after different problems and try to solve them for yourself. I've seen this play out in so many scenarios, whether that's in the media, and people I know personally, or just for women on a large scale, of denying what we want. Instead of asking for what it is that we really want, whether that's from a partner, from a job, or from ourselves, we pretend to want less than we actually do. And in the end, that doesn't hurt anybody else but ourselves. We are forfeiting our own desires in order to create peace, in order to uphold this social contract of not being someone who asks for too much. Henrik describes a similar scenario in his own life where he was wanting to be a writer. He saw these examples of all the greats around him and was deeply inspired by it, but for some reason couldn't really push himself to have the audacity to ask for those things in his own life. He says, "I think the main reason I didn't realize my problems were solvable was a lack of imagination. I'd never seen anyone solve problems in an agentic way, and I failed to imagine that things I hadn't seen done could be done by me." Last year, I revisited one of my long-term and biggest dreams, which is to move across the country by myself in pursuit of a dream that has just been unshakable for a while. And in that, there's obviously a lot of fear surrounding that decision. Like, I don't know a single soul, but that erotic desire, that burning to know what's on that other side of me stepping into this new version of myself, and the people I'll meet, the version of me that I'll meet when I get there, it just outweighs any sort of fear or any sort of pull to keep me small and keep me stagnant. And there was a lot of grappling and detangling of just pressures and fear and shame that came around choosing something that was entirely for myself. And no one around me has done this. No one around me has radically uprooted their lives alone. But it has to be done by someone. And I can't sit around and wait for there to be an example for me to feel emboldened enough to take that grand leap. Carlson says, "You have to keep your eyes locked on your values so that you don't sacrifice the wrong thing." This connects right back to the big thing concept of thick and thin desires. Being so rooted in your thick desires and clear on what the foundational things that you value are will help you act in accordance to this grand life that you want to build for yourself. When we go through our lives just living in accordance to what other people have desired without ever pausing to ask ourselves what it is we specifically want, it breeds resentment, it breeds self-abandonment and martyrdom, and women often fall into that trap very easily. It's like the scene from The Notebook. What do you want? What do you want? Truly, take out your pen and paper right now. Ask yourself, what do you want? Whether that's in your job, in your relationships, in where you're living, what do you want? It is okay for you to want what it is that you want. You do not have to attach shame or any sort of pressure to want the same things as the people around you. Agency is often something that is tied closely to feminism, and specifically, I want to get into a little bit of choice feminism, which is something that I've heard of but never really deep dived into before this episode. Choice feminism is saying that not every choice is inherently feminist just because it is made by a woman. There are things that women do that are directly harmful to other women or harmful to themselves. This can be reflected in so many different situations, but a big one is in the partners that we choose to couple up with. We'll get into romantic desire and how that is its own beast in a little bit, but it makes me incredibly sad to see so many women my age and even older that fall into the trap of feeling like they have to get into romantic partnerships just because that's the blueprint. I'm fortunate enough to live in a generation that is a lot more empowered and independent than ever before, but still so many of us are plagued by the trap of being in a relationship. That's not to say that all men are terrible and that all men are going to disappoint you. However, as a collective, that is a fear and that is a genuine concern when getting into relationships with men. And as it relates to choice feminism, I do think that we should interrogate why we are going towards certain things and if it's of service to us in the long run or if it's of service to the idea of women in general. There's a trend of women, and I'll categorize it as the Samantha Jones, who are complacent in engaging in these relationships with men that are not serving them, that are very emotionally draining, and on the outside perceived as embarrassing, but they are willing to put themselves in this self-sacrificial position just because they think that being with a man, even if it's an embarrassing one, is better than being by themselves. And at the end of the day, this is a choice, and they have the luxury of making that choice, but I just want them to know that they can desire more. They are allowed to be alone. That is another choice on the table as well. I think it is incredibly feminist and empowering to do an audit of your life and see if the choices you're making are truly coming from a personal, thick desire that you have, or if you are just simply mimicking the desires and the blueprint of a lifestyle that you've seen from others. Audre Lorde says, "Our erotic knowledge empowers us, becomes a lens through which we scrutinize all aspects of our existence, forcing us to evaluate those aspects honestly in terms of their relative meaning within our lives." And this is a grave responsibility projected within each of us, not to settle for the convenient, the shoddy, the conventionally accepted, nor merely the safe. I love how she urges us to defy gravity, to defy whatever it is that seems like the easy path. Being in my early 20s and seeing people who I went to high school with starting to start families, I always wonder if that is a choice that they have come to the conclusion that it is right for them, or if it is just something that is convenient. Because following the capitalistic patriarchal blueprint of man meets woman, man proposes, woman now pregnant, woman tied to man forever is easy. That's easy. And I'm not saying that that's not valuable and that building a beautiful life with someone isn't of value, but I just want you to know that you can choose whether you want that for yourself or not. Eros, as it is presented in Greek mythology, is all about love and passion, both platonic and romantic feelings, intimacy, and ultimately urges us to explore the unknown. In her Substack, Desire is Dead, Lauren Hall says, "Eros calls us to not know, be willing to be enraptured by the unknowability of everything, even ourselves, especially ourselves. Desire, romance, eros, and pleasure are about keeping the other as not an extension of you, your wants, your desires, your understandings, but their own distinct, distant essence. They are not you. They are not for you. They are other." And I love how she touches on this idea of keeping the separation between self and other, and your erotic desire is you going down that mysterious path to get to know that person. And it's not so much about possession of another person or of merging your desires and wants with theirs, but observing them, experiencing them, and seeing what they can unlock within the world that is you. She references, I believe, an author named Barthes in her essay, and a quote from him says, "It's my desire I desire. The loved being is no more than its tool." There's a really famous quote that goes, "If you've ever had a crush, you're a creative," which I just love the repositioning of our attention towards creating something, not so much creating something in someone. Sure, love is a beautiful act and one that I think is so sacred, but it is not the only way for you to bring something to life. It is not the extent of your ability to create something. Hall writes that because Eros is more than romance, it's an existential vibration of experiencing the other around you, anyone and anything where pleasure can be found. Your desires are not limited to just romance or a person for you to cast as the object of your desires. I know it can be a daunting question, asking yourself, what do you desire? Give yourself permission to not have it figured out, but also to have that desire evolve. As you learn more about yourself, naturally your desires are going to change and shift with you. Just like how I was so married to this idea of a career, and I learned more, experienced more, and therefore my desires shifted with me. The focus of this episode was about female desire and centering women in this conversation. When I would look up female desire, the main thing that would pop up, the tagline, would be divine femininity. And I found it really interesting and honestly alarming that a lot of these conversations were being facilitated by men. Because what do they have to say about what we want, what we desire? There's got to be more of us talking about this, and someone who does it beautifully is Elizabeth Gilbert in her discussion on divine femininity. She gave a brief history of the more religious and spiritual examples of divinity for both men and women, and something that really struck me was when she was discussing how men and women differently can obtain this sense of divinity and sacredness. Men gain divinity through losing their ego, but women gain divinity through gaining an ego.
I am not ready to become nobody. I'm not ready. That's not my way. And I don't think it's any woman's way, actually, if I'm being incredibly blunt. You know why? Because for thousands of years, women have been throwing themselves away. We've been giving back to the communities, to babies. We've been birthing life since the very beginning. Actually, the way that we come to know and see and feel and understand God is by being fucking huge. I am something in the world. And I am here to birth something. I'm here to create something. And I give myself the permission to do that. You know what happens when women do that? The entire fucking world changes.
So often women are told that they have to rid themselves of selfishness, rid themselves of themselves, and gain others in order to become of value. We take on this belief with us throughout our lives, and that leads us down a rabbit hole of self-abandonment and never truly knowing who we are and what we want. Just like there can be the profane or toxic masculinity, there can be the profane and toxic femininity, which is one that is so committed to being without a self, one that doesn't know what they want, doesn't know who they are, and therefore is easily taken advantage of. You do not win anything or become somehow morally superior by never asking for anything, by never saying, this is what I desire, and having the audacity to go in the direction of that desire. The narrative that asking for anything is asking for too much is something that is so commonly pushed onto women, and we internalize that. We learn to be quiet, to not ask for too much, or to not ask for anything entirely. In the video essay by Wild Geese, she touches on how women are expected to be these selfless beings. When you think of mothers, one of the first things that their husbands or family members will praise them for is being selfless. But when you interrogate that word just a little bit further, selfless, without a self, that sounds terrifying. What do you mean without a self? Like, this is the only known being that you are going to have the privilege of embodying and occupying. Why would you want to lose that? Why would you want to give that away to someone else? They have them, you have you. It's really disgusting that that is something that is so highly valued in our society, of being without a self. I think it's important to be compassionate and caring, but that doesn't mean that you don't extend that to yourself. Circling back to Elizabeth Gilbert's video on divine femininity, she talks about how to make something sacred. In order to make something sacred, she says that you draw a circle around it and declare that everything in this circle is sacred because I said so. And you can do the same thing, but with yourself at the center. A way for women to reclaim agency and autonomy over our wants, needs, and not live a life that is simply just handed to us and predetermined. We must draw that sacred circle around ourselves and call in what is in alignment with the life that we are crafting for ourselves. I've been thinking a lot about living a handmade life, one of my own design, and it truly does require me to be the one to create the rules and create the blueprint for what that looks like. And I must keep myself at the center. Whenever I listen too heavily to what people outside of me are doing and let that dictate my own life, it only just makes me feel worse about myself, obviously, because I'm living a life that is not my own. Something that really stuck with me from Elizabeth Gilbert's video was when she was talking about what a privilege it is to be given the task of taking care of this being. She says, it's not about deifying yourself, but rather remembering what a privilege and responsibility it is to take care of your being. How lucky are we to be able to look after ourselves, to be able to follow our desires, follow our unique curiosities, and see where it leads us. This is so closely connected to our purpose, and I've done a whole episode about that, so if you want to know more of my thoughts, go there. But I truly think that our purpose can be something as grand as curing cancer, or something as simple as smiling at someone at the grocery store. And how lucky are you that you get to be the one to find what that purpose is and truly put your desires at the center. It's hard for me to discuss desire without mentioning its ties to romantic connection. Singleness, as I've come to understand it, is a social construct, one that reinforces capitalism. If we can make women feel inadequate in their solitude, then we can keep them on a hamster wheel of self-improvement, promising that one day a man will finally love your flawed self. There is never an end to romantic desire and longing because the rules and expectations are always changing. But you are allowed to want more than wanting to be wanted by a man. And this is something that I came to the conclusion in a journal entry. I had a crush again for the first time in a really long time, and it hit me like a truck and reminded me just how quickly I can romanticize a situation with someone, and the desire for that connection is very genuine, very precious, something that I never want to lose sight of. But it got to a point. It gets to a point where, am I willing to abandon myself in the potential pursuit of someone? Or can I just give those things to myself? Now, I also want to say that this is a very nuanced conversation because there is so much pathologizing female desire that takes place in our culture, even though it is the most human and natural thing. Desiring connection and wanting to have someone to share your beautiful life that you've built for yourself, wanting to share that with someone is normal. That is not something that we should want to rid ourselves of. However, it is the way in which we go about getting those desires fulfilled and the people that we choose to fulfill those desires that can make it a little bit messy, a little anti-feminist, if I must say. During the many months that I was drafting this episode, the article by Shantae Joseph called "Is Having a Boyfriend Embarrassing Now?" took over the internet, at least the side of the internet that I occupy. And so many people were having conversations about this, and I'm really happy with the discourse that it sparked because it forced us to really reevaluate why we value relationships and the shift of prioritizing being chosen by a man and showing him off. Joseph interviewed various women from different backgrounds, women that were outward about their relationships and would post their partners, or those who felt more of a pull to be private about that. But collectively, she noticed that they all were feeling the same sense of shame around speaking about their partner publicly. She says that women don't want to be seen as being all about their man, but they also want the clout that comes with being partnered. And in general, she was commenting on the nature of men as they've existed for a while and continue to exist in, which is one of embarrassment, one of disappointment, one of being unable to reciprocate energy. And as women, it's important for us to ask ourselves if that's something we truly desire. Having a relationship is becoming less and less of a signifier of value. However, it is still something that informs people's choices. It is something that people still desire, whether it is from a personal standpoint or just a mimetic desire. I did allow myself to fall down the rabbit hole of romantic desire, and I came across a term that I've never heard before, but it kind of applied to a way that me and my friends and a lot of women around me have been feeling, which is heteropessimism. It is the almost aversion to wanting men, but not being able to rid yourself of that desire, and the embarrassment that comes with admitting that I want a boyfriend or I want a partner. There is an entire essay on it just about the topic of heteropessimism, but in this specific Substack, it states that desire has a funky way of crawling to the surface and placing deep roots no matter how hard you try to suppress it and rein it in and deny its existence. In part, I balk at how heteropessimism places the onus on women to self-regulate their desire for their own safety by positioning the poor conduct of men as unchanging, inevitable, irredeemable, simultaneously accepting, implicitly, that women are the more malleable and reformable quantity in this equation. I love that they highlighted the toxicity of this concept of heteropessimism, because while those are valid feelings, I get annoyed at myself all the time that I desire men despite how disappointing they've been. It puts men in this position of ridding them of any responsibility. Just like with the "is having a boyfriend embarrassing" article, the critiques around that one were also bringing to light the fact that the responsibility of being embarrassing should be placed on the men, not the ones having the boyfriend. Like, do you see where we're going wrong here? We're once again shaming women for men's bad behavior, for men's faults. It is not your fault for desiring this idealized version of a man and believing that you're one day going to be connected with him, but it is not your responsibility to then put yourself in harmful situations with men that have proven time and time again that they are nothing but embarrassing. You are allowed to desire more than a man. And you're also allowed to desire a man, but do not let yourself lose yourself in that desire. It's not that I don't want to get married or ever have to be in close relations with a man. It's simply that the modern landscape and the conditions that we exist under are just unbearable. We are so steeped in systems of patriarchy and things that reinforce a mediocrity in men. They are not being held to a standard that would sustain a relationship long term. Garnett writes that the bitterness does not replace wanting men. The bitterness grows from the want, mixed up with it. There must be something wrong, I keep thinking, with the way I desire. The entire concept of heteropessimism or even heterofatalism is another way of pathologizing desire. Pathologizing desire simply ignores the fact that humans were designed for connection. There's just simply an imbalance with what we want as women and what's available to us. But that doesn't mean that we should stop desiring in general. You're allowed to want what you want, but it is about how, like I mentioned earlier, you can begin to give that to yourself. I spent so much of 2024 removing myself from this endless pursuit of romantic love, something that I never got the privilege of experiencing in my younger teenage years, even though a lot of my friends did, and something that I attached a lot of shame to not getting. But in 2024, I'm very grateful that I decided to be proactive about going and doing things that I wanted because I wanted to do them, doing them alone and finding empowerment in that. And I do think that there is value in taking ownership of my life in that way. However, advice that I see being given to single women a lot in the context of desire, decentering men, and putting yourself at the center of your sacred circle is just getting more hobbies, just going out more. And there's no amount of hobbies, endless to-do list, busyness that can rid you of the natural desire for connection. And that's not something that you should necessarily want to get rid of. I think it's important to diverge your energy from a man that maybe doesn't know what to do with it and pour that back into yourself. But at the end of the day, the two can coexist. You can desire love, a man, and romance while still also centering yourself and prioritizing doing things that make you feel fulfilled. Something that I am fearful of in my future relationship, and also something that I just see in the media so heavily, is the trope of an ambitious woman and a man who's complacent, a man who is comfortable staying where he is, and a woman who has big dreams that she wants to take wherever they lead her. And in the conversation of romantic relationships, so often we are taught to compromise, which can quickly just turn into settling and abandoning your own desires. It's not noble or an act of love to do so. It is actually martyrdom, self-abandonment, and doing you and your partner a disservice to pretend like you want less than you actually do. Single women are urged to be overly ambitious, to do and be everything in order to make up for a lack of partnership. Fiona Shea perfectly sums this up in her Substack article in a very cheeky and entertaining way. She says, "Wait a damn minute, where's the independent feminist baddie in me? So swiftly she's erased in the image of a man. I thought my aspiration was to achieve creative freedom and financial independence and cultivate my own sense of security and stability. Or do I do all of these things, work out and write and put myself out there and try to be a high-achieving person simply in hopes of raising my value in the market?" I said I didn't want to make this episode too much about romantic desire, but it does seep into so much of what single women are told that they're allowed to want and what we have to interrogate for ourselves that we actually want. Thinking of performing this version of the girl that has all the hobbies, the girl that is so multifaceted, that has things that fulfill her on her own, has a friend group, just to prove that she is of value for a potential partner to pick her, is just another way that women are not given the permission to just be and to follow what feels right for them. I personally am someone that I do think my ambition comes from a natural place. I like doing a lot of things. Like, I do enjoy having a full to-do list and remaining busy, but I also do feel that pressure to always have something that I'm working towards, because if I'm not having a partner who's proving that I'm worthy, well then surely I must have something else for myself to show. Fiona says, "I'm like a doll in a store window sporting a crop top and barely there abs etched into my porcelain. As soon as I'm inside his house, unwrapped and out of the box, I don't have to try any longer." This is a very slippery slope when analyzing personal desire and how that could relate to romantic desire, because what if you do naturally want to live a big life and you have these ambitions that are just pulling you, but you also desire big love? I'll update you when that happens to me and how I navigate that. I do think it's possible. I just think it takes a lot of honesty with yourself and your partner and not shying away from what you truly want. She says, "I can't quite discern if I'm striving to build an enriching life for myself so that I can truly experience it firsthand, know it and smell it and see it and taste it, or so that I can simply tell other people about it. I'm building something for show, like an art class diorama. Sometimes it feels like I'm becoming a character, and I can't remember when I stopped being me." I love how she brings to light this tension that is so familiar of trying to locate where our desires come from. I think it's incredibly valuable to ask ourselves why we desire what we desire, as well as the what. If your sole reason for having hobbies and filling your life with all these things is in spite of men, you are still putting them at the center. I want this episode to remind you that you don't have to consider men in the conversation of what you want. You can draw a circle of sacredness around yourself, putting you at the center and inviting in whatever it is that feels right. I want to close this out with a few quotes from the article Erotic Decisions by Muse Guided. She says, "An erotic life is the decision to let yourself be undone by what draws you in. The erotic is not confined to bodies. It is the fire that propels the soul out of dormancy. It is the throb of longing for something more. Systems of control, political, religious, familial, have always sought to neutralize the erotic because it cannot be domesticated. Eros threatens order. It whispers, you are more than this. You could leave. You could want something else. And that, to the status quo, is heresy." I hope that this conversation was a reminder that it can be about you and that your desires, your wants, and your intricate curiosities are of value, and it is up to you to make them sacred. Draw a circle around yourself and make sure that you always stay at the center. I love you. You are capable of creating a life for yourself, a life that is designed around your pleasure, what you want, and you deserve it. 2026 is for going after our big desires and just knowing that we are divinely supported and guided. So I love you so much. I feel like I was word vomiting this entire episode, but hey, it's gonna go up anyway, so if it resonated, please let me know, because I'm feeling a little bit insecure. But that's okay. We're feeling the fear and doing it anyways. Whatever. All right, forehead kiss time. Sorry, I don't know why I got a little pissed off right there. Bring it in, sweetheart. I love you so very much. Go bring something to life. I love you.